And now, let Freedom Ring 2014.com, the radio show. Paid for by Jim Condit Jr. for Congress, 2014.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jim Condit Jr. Sitting across the table from me is former Congressman, the Honorable Jim Trafficant.
Call me names.
Okay. This man is, in my opinion, the most interesting, entertaining, and informative interview in the country, but he's been banned from all 5 TV networks, including Fox News, since 2011. We'll get into that somewhere in the show. He's the national director of a new project that is his own called ProjectFreedomUSA.com. We're going to talk about that, then we're going to get into some other things, because the fight that Jim Trafficant has been waging for all of us is the fight for America. And Jim, thanks for coming down tonight.
Well, I'm going to tell you the truth, and I want your listeners to hear this. I want everybody that's listening. Jim Condit told me he's going to bring me down to KRP and introduce me to Lonnie Anderson. Now, I came down here, and it's KRC, and I'm sitting in here with Big Chuck and all the guys back in the studio over here, and Mr. Cunningham, who's on the air in another studio. So I'm upset. Jim, I want to know, where's Lonnie Anderson? I mean, what kind of politician are you going to be? Huh?
Yeah, I have to take a no comment on that. So.
Yeah, well, anyway, I want to say this. I'm glad to be here with you, and I'm down here because I love you.
Thank you, Jim.
And I think the world of you. And, in fact, I've asked you to play a significant role in the state of Ohio with Project Freedom USA. But, you know, in discussing this, like we were discussing a little bit earlier before the show, here we are in America. 50% of the people are paying taxes. 50% do not pay income taxes. The country's going to hell in a handbasket. We've got massive budget deficits. And what nobody's talking about is a humongous trade deficit. And, Jim, if you buy more than you sell, you go bankrupt. That's just the way it is. And we're buying so much more than we sell. How much more hemorrhaging can this nation take? So, all the years I was in Congress, I can remember the Graham-Rudman 6-year deal, and then the Bush 7-year deal, and then the Clinton 5-year deal. Now the Republicans have a 10-year deal. They're not going to do anything, Jim, because the only way they can do this is put more taxes on mom and pop. We're paying the load for this country, and we're at the breaking point. There's one statistic that is very important that I want to bring out. Because I can remember when I was elected to Congress, my dad was a truck driver. I'm the son of a truck driver. They call me a son of many things, but I'm the son of a truck driver. And my dad was a smart guy. And he said to me, Jimbo, he said, don't get tied up in this tax the rich business. He said, really? He says, and I was a Democrat all my life. He says, this business, every election, of beating up on the rich, and everybody says, yeah, let the rich pay, let the rich pay. He said, look, if that fellow with money or that woman with money doesn't make an investment, guys like me don't work. I've never worked for a poor guy. And I never forgot that. And let me tell you where we're at in America. And this is a statistics no one's talking about. And it's a danger point. It's a red flag. It's a red light blinking off and on, Jim. The top 10% of the wage earners in the United States of America pay 70% of our income taxes. Now, let me say that again. The top 10% of wage earners in America pay 70% of America's income tax. Let me tell you what's going to happen. We've overtaxed our business and industry. We've overregulated them. We've suffocated them. To make a profit, they left and they went overseas. It's not because they weren't patriotic. They would have folded if they didn't go overseas. Our policies now are going to drive our wealth out of this country. The rich people are going to start saying, listen, enough is enough. Now we're up and talking about a 39.6 top rate. We're talking about high corporate taxes. Who do you think pays the corporate taxes? Corporations don't pay them. They pass them on to the consumer. And when, in passing them on to the consumer, those taxes become so oppressive, they leave the country. They leave and take their jobs with it. So here we are. Where are the jobs? What's the program? I don't see a program in sight. Now, one of my last bills in Congress, and I firmly believe, Jim, I would have passed that. Later on in this show, we'll discuss the fact that I was the member that was responsible for changing the burden of proof in the 1998 bill, reform bill.
Regarding the IRS having to go to court to take somebody's home.
No, not just that. The burden of proof meant when the IRS took the taxpayer to a civil tax court, the taxpayer had to prove they were innocent. They had the burden. Now, 96% of all tax cases, tax court cases, are civil law. So the IRS, they take you to civil court, and you had the burden of proof. What chance did that taxpayer have? So in the 98 bill, that changed. But if you knew how it changed, it would give you a microscopic look, if you will, of the genesis of Project Freedom USA. The Traficant bill said, look, the IRS says you owe us money. They come out to audit you. You have to cooperate. You just can't tell them to go to hell. But if they're not satisfied and they then litigate, as soon as they litigate, the burden of proof then transfers from the taxpayer to the IRS. Well, the IRS was adamant. I almost got in a fist fight with Dan Rostenkowski. He said, you're just getting the American people all riled up against this trafficking. I said, like hell. I said, where is it in America that the government can hold a person guilty and have them prove their innocence? Where does that come in any form or fashion in our Bill of Rights or Constitution? Mm-hmm. So as you can see, I fell out with everybody. Well, the Republicans took over in 94. In 98, they came with a reform bill for the IRS. And they have these bills every year. Well, I got a call from the chairman, the new chairman, Bill Archer. He said, Jim, your burden of proof is really the most significant aspect of reform. He said, but it's controversial. It's controversial, and the IRS has recommended to Clinton, President Clinton, that if the trafficking language is in this bill, they're going to recommend the veto. So we don't want to get into that type of a problem, Jim. We just like to get some basic reform through, and then we'll look at your issue next year. So I said, Jim, look, I'm going to vote for it. It's a feel-good bill, but it's really not going to accomplish that much. Well, the bottom line was I got a call later that night, about 11 o'clock, after I made a speech on the House floor. It was Bill Archer from Texas, and he said, the chairman, he said, Jim, I can't believe it. We've had so many contacts from throughout America. They want the trafficking burden of proof in that bill. And he said, Jim, I'm going to put it in conference. So one of the first times in history, here's the two bills, the Senate bill and the House bill. Neither of them have the burden of proof language, and it was inserted into conference, and then it was passed on each respective floor. Now, the IRS recommended a veto to Clinton. Meanwhile, I do a TV show with Bob Novak, who's now deceased, very conservative, friend of mine. And he said, Jim, I don't know how you're going to get around this. You know, the IRS recommended a veto. I said, look, they don't call Clinton Slick Willie for nothing. He can go ahead and veto the bill and satisfy these IRS wolves, or he can go ahead and sign the bill and make the American taxpayers real and happy. And he got a lot of votes, too. Well, Clinton eventually signed the bill. But the bottom line was, here's exactly what happened. There was a debate with me and the IRS commissioner in the Wall Street Journal. And this acting commissioner, she basically said they're going to have tough investigations and blah, blah, blah. I said, give me an example. She cited this example, Jim. She says, what if a taxpayer claims he gives $1,000 a week to the church? She said, we'll have to do a net worth. We'll have to do a lifestyle. We'll have to go to their neighbors. We'll have to go to their bank. We'll have to go to where they do business. I said, why don't you go to the church and see if they have a receipt? And then she came out and said it. She says, how can the IRS prove a negative? And what I said to her was, how the hell can a taxpayer prove a negative? If you're accusing, you should have enough documentation to substantiate taking that matter to court through litigation, or you shouldn't be charging that taxpayer. Well, Clinton signed the bill. Let me give you some statistics. They did a snapshot look 12 months before 98 and 12 months after, and they compared when the taxpayer had the burden of proof and when the IRS had the burden of proof. First category was wage garnishments. When the taxpayer had to prove it, 3.1 million Americans had their wages garnished. Next year, when the IRS had the burden of proof, it dropped to 560,000. 3 million less, Jim. The second category was property liens. When the taxpayer had to prove it, there are 670,000 approximate property liens. The following year, when the IRS had the burden, it dropped to 161,000, 500,000 less. But the big one was, and you've talked about it many times, individual seizures of family-owned homes. When the taxpayer had the burden of proof, 10,073. When the IRS had the burden of proof, 57 homes in 50 states.
I hope everybody is taken a mental note there. From 10,600 or so down to only 59 homes, family homes seized, when the IRS had to prove it. But as you said, Jim, that was the only area where the taxpayer was guilty till proven innocent. Yeah. Now you made it so they're innocent till proven guilty. The Traficant bill. Now let me
give them a fighting chance in court. Yeah,
and we need a groundswell, and you can lead it across the country.
The reason why I bring this up is it would have never been in that bill, Jim, if it weren't for the people calling Congress. They called that chairman and says, we want that burden of proof language in that bill. Yep. We want Trafficant's language. It wasn't in there.
Yeah.
And I'm saying the Project Freedom USA is basically the same tack. What we've got to do is we've got to develop a groundswell around America to become so loud and so powerful. These politicians in Washington who wake up in the morning, look out the window, see which way the mob is going, put on their overcoat and go out and lead the mob so they'd fall in line and do what's right. Here's what Project Freedom USA is, Jim. By the way, it's projectfreedomusa.org.
And that website will be up soon.
It will be up soon. We already have several states now with directorship. Most recent is the state of Florida. Looks like the first event will be in Florida the first week. Couple days in June, I think the 2nd and 3rd, and a major kickoff in July 18th and 19th, Friday and Saturday in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Which I want to make sure you're there.
I'll be there.
And we want to have people there to understand it. Here's what Project Freedom USA is. Number one, this is what we advocate, and this is what we're trying to get the nation to look at. Number one, no more income tax. All income taxes and payroll taxes are eliminated and replaced with a 19% flat national retail sales tax.
That means no more IRS.
No, wait a minute. Let me go on.
Okay.
Yes, the IRS is thus abolished. They got to get a job. They're out. Nothing personal. We don't need them. Okay? In our face.
Right.
Just to make sure, we advocate putting the nail in a coffin with a single-purpose constitutional amendment to repeal the 16th Amendment, where nothing else can be brought in, no hidden agendas on guns or anything,
right?
Just to kill it for sure. But this means, Jim, now, there'll be no more withholding. The workers get their entire pay. That's like getting a 15 to 20% pay raise right there.
Yeah.
Okay? Second of all, no more tax on savings. I don't know how much time you got before your break.
Well,
how much time do you have?
Why don't we take the break and then we'll come back and get into the other aspects.
Well, you're getting real pushy here. I'm looking for Lonnie Anderson. Don't let me forget where we are.
Okay.
And listen, you're getting to be real political here tonight.
Okay.
Concerned about you.
Okay. We're going to go to a break. Now, I want to say this before we go to we're going to go to a little song break here. It's Mary Fall singing Going Home from Gettysburg, just about 2 minutes. I'm Jim Condit Jr. running for Congress against John Boehner, so I'm going to ask everybody out there in Boehner's district, which is Butler County and so forth, to pick the Constitution Party primary ballot. The more of you that pick the Constitution primary ballot and vote for me, it's a message to Boehner in Washington. We want some backbone up there like Jim Trafficant has, for heaven's sakes. Let's go to the first break here. Okay, it's Jim Condit Jr. here, Jim Condit Jr. for Congress. We're back with Jim Trafficant, and before Jim takes over again, I just want to say the idea is to create a groundswell, grassroots movement to take back this country, and it can be done, but you got to have a good plan and good leadership. So, Jim, you were talking about the IRS would be ended, and the Towles and Traficant bill, and the sales tax and so forth.
Basically, what it is income taxes and payroll taxes would be over. The IRS would be abolished. There'd be a flat 19% national retail sales tax on all new goods and services. Nothing used would be taxed. For example, now there'd be no more withholding. You'd get the entire pay. No more tax on savings and savings accounts of any kind. No more tax, estate taxes, inheritance taxes, gift taxes. It's over. No more tax on capital gains. They say, well, Jim, what the hell are you talking about? No tax on capital gains. We want to reward people to invest money. That's what creates jobs, Jim. The government jobs create more debt.
Yeah.
Yes, no capital gains tax in America. No corporation tax in America.
Which is all passed on to the people anyway.
Corporation taxes are gone. No more tax on Social Security. No more tax on Medicare. That 7.62% that comes out of there, no more. It's all handled through the 19%, which calls for a 25% reduction in the size of our government. We recommend eliminating the Department of Education. Let the school boards and let the states and the local people run the schools. Department of Energy, it was created because of stop our dependence on foreign oil. These jackasses have made it worse for us. We don't need that bureaucracy. We do not need the Environmental Protection Agency. Congress could set standards and the states could enforce it.
Right.
We do not need an Office of Homeland Security.
Right.
They don't even support putting troops on our border. We've got borders wide open with these. I've never seen anything. Beam me up. That's how dumb it is. 25% reduction in the size of government. But see, Jim, there's no more forms, no more receipts, no more liens, no more late charges, no more oaths to break, no more laws to break, no more homes seized, no more people harassed. It's over. American people were free. I believe they are enslaved to a communist income tax system. And let me say that. They say, Jim, you're just upset because you and the government have been fighting for so many years. This is not personal. It's a fact. The foundation of the Communist Party, written by Karl Marx, the #1 communist in world history, was a progressive income tax. And the United States of America has it for 100 years, beaten the hell out of us.
Right.
But now, that's just now looking at the snapshot on the income tax side of it, the national retail sales tax side of it. When you take a look at that, right now, what are they taxing? 50% of the American people are paying income tax. Everybody would pay. Plus, that retail sales tax is going to hit that underground economy, that criminal economy that doesn't pay. All the people that escape the payment of cash income. And all the foreign visitors that come to this country from Japan and Germany, they go to Las Vegas, they go to Broadway, they go to Hollywood. They'd be paying in and financing our Social Security and our general fund, folks. It's time. It's absolute time to throw this communist program out. Now, everybody's going to say, well, Jim, I don't know, man. I don't know, man. That's really, really reaching. Listen, this isn't rocket science. This isn't brain surgery. Everybody got to pay. We call for a rebate on the bottom end for basic necessities.
For people at the low end of the
spectrum. For people in the
spectrum.
low end, and that would be worked into it. We also want to eliminate welfare. Anybody that's getting a welfare check will get a workfare check. And they will be told to report to the Cincinatti Street Department or the Ohio State Highway Authority on such and such days, or they're not going to get the check.
Rebuild the infrastructure.
Rebuild the infrastructure, and nobody, unless they're disabled, is going to get it. It's out of control, Jim.
Absolutely.
Look,
the able-bodied will work.
Everybody's got to pay their way. But now the main thing is they're saying, well, Jim, 19%, including Social Security and Medicare, it's a saving for every family. First of all, let's take a look at some of the dynamics here. Social Security is bankrupt. They're lying to us. It's paying out more than it's taking in. There's no way they can finance it. Now you have everybody that's going to support that, and we call for a lockbox for the money to be directed to that lockbox, and it can't be used for no other purpose.
And everything done in the open. And
everything done in the open.
Yeah.
But the big one is, and they're saying, Jim, you're reaching. You're reaching. It's never going to happen. We don't want to kill the Fed. We don't want to audit the Federal Reserve. We want a divorce. We want a divorce. 100 years, you've raped us. We want a divorce for adultery. They've screwed us. We place the monetary control and supply of money back under Congress, who shall issue debt-free money, and we will pay the bondholders and the people who purchase our T-bills. But all interest payments due to that Federal Reserve System shall be repudiated.
Because they didn't deserve it in the first place.
It's time, folks. Now, we're not saying, look, we're going to kill them. They can go screw the rest of the world if they want to keep their program up, but no more here. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
We're saying, literally now, take back our country. Now, something I want your listeners
Hold on just one second. It's 10:30. We got an hour and a half to go, but we got to give the station, Mr. Producer, if you can do your station break and my station break. Jim Condit Jr. for Congress. Take the Constitution Party ballot. If you like what Jim Trafficant's saying, I support it. Take the Constitution Party ballot in Butler County and John Boehner's district. Vote for me and send Washington a message. We want some backbone like Jim Trafficant has up in Washington.
You're listening to LetFreedomRing2014.com, the radio show, paid for by Jim Condit Jr. for Congress, 2014.
Okay, everybody, Jim Trafficant Jr. here with Jim Trafficant, former Congressman, the Honorable Jim Trafficant.
Don't call me names. I want to say something, Maybe the station doesn't necessarily agree with all the things it said, but I sure as hell agree with the things that I'm saying, and I want you to listen to them. But, I want to say something in all seriousness now, Jim, before I get away.
Yeah.
On the break, you says, look, what about the cost? Everybody calls and says, man, we're going to get hit with this big sales tax.
19%. Would prices go up 19%?
First of all, let me say this. You get your whole withholding, that's about a 15% kicker right there. Right now, the government takes it, and they decide to spend it in Afghanistan and Iraq and in foreign aid in every which way. You'd get it, and you'd prioritize the agenda for you and your family. Mm-hmm. But second of all, every American, man, woman, and child, carries an $850 personal compliance cost with this tax code, this communist tax code. In addition, a Harvard study said 25% of the cost of a manufactured item in America is the cost put on the product because of that company's compliance cost with the income tax code. They said when you take those compliance costs out, American prices will probably drop to a point where you probably won't notice that tax at all, number one. And number two, it'll make our exports attractive and our imports for the first time in history, Jim, hit with a border-adjusted, non-protectionist tax. Those imports are going to be facing the same tax structure as our domestic products. Now you'll see the trade deficit drop. You'll see trade surplus. And finally, Project Freedom USA says when there is a surplus, that money is to be equally distributed to each and every household. Not taxpayer, household. You see, the current income tax, communist system, rewards dependency, penalizes achievement, subsidizes illegitimacy, kills investment, shifts jobs overseas. How much more of it we going to take? How much more? Nobody thinks this country is going to collapse? Well, anybody that's listening, just think of this. You woke up one morning and you heard on the news, maybe KRC, that this big bad superpower, the evil empire, the Soviet Union, no longer exists. There wasn't a shot fired. There were no student protests. There were no CIA warnings. What a black hole that is. I wonder what the hell they do. But all of a sudden, there's no more superpower. Mm-hmm. And no one thinks it's going to happen here. Believe me, China's burning the midnight oil. They're trying to get at our dollar. Mm-hmm. Charles de Gaulle said you never defeat America with a missile, but you destroy America through the dollar. And they're burning that midnight oil. We're saying, let's get these bankers the hell out of here. Let's put our money back up under the Congress. Let's issue debt-free money. Let's put America on track. But there's one thing, Jim, historically, the American people maybe don't understand. And no offense to the Tea Party people. I like their movement. I wish they wouldn't have gotten aligned. They should have stayed third party and independent. The nation needs that. They don't need another party to be absorbed into one of these two parties, which they were. They fell under some of this seduction of the Republicans. But
they can reverse that by joining Project Freedom USA.
Well, they should be involved with Project Freedom USA. But let me say this. Mm-hmm. The Tea Party, the Revolutionary War. I wonder how many listeners ever heard this. The writings of Benjamin Franklin. When Benjamin Franklin in the late 1700s made a speech, and he said, America is so prosperous. Our colonies are great because we handle our own currency, debt-free money. The bankers over in England heard about it. The bankers went to the English Parliament. They sat down with the English Parliament, and Parliament passed a law forbidding the colonies to use their own money. They no longer could use American money. They had to use money from the Bank of England and start paying interest. You know what Benjamin Franklin said?
What?
He said America didn't go to war over a couple pennies tax on tea. It was those bankers that took away our ability to finance and handle our own currency and our own money. Folks, enough is enough.
That's right.
Now, these bankers are on record as saying, look, we don't care who writes the laws for a country. If we handle the money, we run the country. How much more are we going to take? Let's throw these people out. I don't know how many people are listening here, and quite frankly, that's the issue. Many of the programs that need to be heard in this country are not going to get the opportunity to really see the light of day. But that's what I'm doing, and one of the reasons I'm here is my great respect for you.
Well, I appreciate that.
I've asked you to take a leadership role in Ohio. We've already have 5 or 6 states on board. We have a fellow up in the Cleveland area handle northern Ohio, and I would like for you to be the person down here responsible for southern Ohio. Now, there's a young man, Sonny Thomas, in Dayton, and I've got to meet with Sonny. He's doing a tremendous job. He's fighting. He's a young patriot, and I want to get him on board with you. But that's why I'm here, because I like you. I want to help you, but I want you and your leadership to come forward, especially your advice and counsel on monetary issues. People may not realize that Jim Condit is one of the top people in our country, and I rely on Jim Condit and Mickey Paletta and Mark Anderson for advice and counsel on monetary issues.
And Jim, any way I can help, and I'm sure there's many people who are listening to this and may hear it eventually on YouTube, feel the same way. Any way we can help. This is the direction we got to go to turn around the country, and it can be done. And the one reason I invited Jim Trafficant down there is he's the only charismatic leader with charisma that can galvanize the thousands of people we need, in my opinion, who's really for real. And I'm a big fan of Ron Paul and so forth for all he's done. But Ron Paul and like myself, when we talk to an audience, we're like high school teachers or college teachers. Jim Trafficant, like John Kennedy, makes you feel like standing up and marching, and that's why I believe you're the guy that's got to galvanize this movement.
Well, I really want to do that. I have a real passion for it, Jim, and I believe had I stayed in Congress, I would have eventually made this happen.
Which is why they got you out of Congress.
I think so, but the main reason that I think they got me out, and this is what the naysayers are going to come at us with.
Yeah.
And they're going to come at it, Jim Trafficant's a crook and all that. I expect that. When that happens, though, you know we're starting to make progress.
Right.
Because they're getting worried.
Right.
But I want to just say this.
Go ahead.
I want to say this.
Go ahead.
I brought home that auto worker from Cleveland.
John Boehner.
He was convicted of being the infamous Ivan the Terrible of the Treblinka concentration camp.
During World War II.
Supposedly exterminated 1 million Jews.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you something. I've been labeled an anti-Semite, a bigot, and all that stuff. And I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not.
And you're
but
absolutely
they say
not.
that anybody who even looked into that had to be an anti-Semite. Here's the bottom line, Jim. That family went to their own Congress people. They went to the senators in Ohio. They went to every congressman in America, every senator in America. They didn't want to come to me. They come right out and said, we know the government hates you. But you're the only guy that maybe has the courage to look at this.
This is what year, roughly?
I don't know, 80s, later 80s.
Late 80s,
yeah.
Okay. So they came to your office. Tell that story. They came
when
to your office.
When they came to my office, my staff said, look, if you meet with these people, you're done. You're against foreign aid. You've already got some of these international groups against you, targeted by American Israel Public Affairs Committee. So you meet with them, you're in trouble. Well, the newspaper didn't say how the genesis of that meeting went. I said, you send them in. Their people in Congress should have had the testicles to give them, as an American citizen, the courtesy of talking to them.
As I remember, you told at one speech I heard that you asked your staff, did they commit any crimes?
Yeah.
And they said, your staff said, as I recall, don't meet with them, as you're saying.
Don't meet.
And what did you say then?
Yeah. I said, you send them in here.
Okay.
So the son and the son-in-law came in, and what happened, I met with them, and what the newspaper didn't say is I told them, look, your dad's been convicted of a most heinous crime. He's on death row in Israel to be executed. And I'll tell you something. If he did that, I could go over and pull the switch. But I think your congressmen, senators should have had the courtesy of meeting with you as a family. So the next day, the newspaper said, Trafficant supports Nazi mass murderer. You know what, Jim? That saved Demoniuk's life. Because people in the government, I mean this isn't bragging. People in the government that had information and knew this was really wrong, they said, here's a guy that will do something. And before long, Jim, I got the evidence to not only prove that he was innocent, but who Ivan was. And then I went over to Israel, because the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati down here wouldn't accept my evidence.
Let me emphasize one thing before you go on. Jim Trafficant, Pat Buchanan wrote a few articles in favor of Boehner, but Jim Trafficant got the evidence from somebody who was a good guy in the State Department that this guy was not Ivan the Terrible. If he was Ivan the Terrible, he would deserve to have the election. But he wasn't.
Not only did I get the facts, our Justice Department had the same facts. I said on the House floor, Congress wouldn't hold a hearing. The Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati wouldn't accept the evidence. The case was, quote unquote, too sensitive. I said on the House floor, since when does sensitivity waive the Bill of Rights?
Right.
So went over to Israel. We submitted to the Israeli Supreme Court. And I was over there, Jim. I did an interview, national interview via satellite with Brian Gumbel of the Today Show.
Okay.
And I told him, listen, they put this man to death. Israel's going to lose $25 billion a year over this. He said, what do you mean, Congressman? They only get $3 billion in foreign aid. I said, that's right. $3 billion in foreign aid. That's $5,000 for every man, woman, and child in Israel. I said, but that's just the foreign aid bill. No one's looking at loans. Loans converted to grants. Grants, economic assistance, military assistance, trade compact. I said, I'm telling you, Israel gets $20+ billion a year from our taxpayers. Oh, thank you, Congressman. Thank you.
And Jim, he ended the interview.
Yeah, that night, my hotel room in Jerusalem, I got a phone call from the Israeli Supreme Court. Now, here's a man convicted, sentenced to be executed. He's on death row, pending execution. And they said, he'll be delivered to you, Mr. Trafficant, tomorrow night at Tel Aviv International Airport. Take him home. And I brought him back. Now, as soon as I went to prison, they took that man over there and they found him guilty of lying on his papers. Every Ukrainian in a situation like Demoniuk lied on their papers, because if they didn't, they'd have been repatriated back to the Soviet Union, and Stalin would have put him in front of a firing squad and had him executed. Enough is enough. That man, our government destroyed his life. He wasn't. My investigation proved who Ivan really was, Jim.
Yeah. And so
they couldn't deny it.
This was an innocent man. It was like a show trial.
Yeah, but no one was going to help the guy.
Yeah, I understand. And now
this is America?
We're going to take another break here, but how
many breaks are you going to have?
We're going to have this one and this, this one and the news, and we got the whole last hour to ourselves. I want to say something though here. Eventually, the Justice Department, quote unquote, Michael Chertoff and company, framed Jim Trafficant for nothing and put him in jail because of the IRS thing and the Jamonic thing. There's a book out named Target Traficant by Michael Collins Piper, shows that Jim Trafficant was put in jail for nothing because he was standing up for us. As George Hansen, the congressman 20 years earlier, was standing up for people against the IRS, and George Hansen was put in jail for nothing in the early 80s, late 70s. So that's Jim Trafficant. No matter what you heard, I'm telling you, I've looked into it, was put in jail not for nothing, because he was standing up for us. And even if he and Hansen had done something wrong, which they didn't, they wouldn't have put in jail for some little misdemeanor all the Congress would be put in jail for that, or at least a lot of them. When you cooperate with the powers that be, the international bankers, you become a multimillionaire like John Kasich, our governor, and John Boehner, the guy I'm running against. And I'm not saying they're deliberately trying to bring America down, but they cooperated with Wall Street and the powers that be. They're multimillionaires. Jim Trafficant was put in jail. The fight for Trafficant's cause or the fight for America are the same thing. We need a grassroots operation. We're going to now have a song, God Bless America. It's interrupted by three voices. John Kennedy. It's interrupted then by Pat Buchanan when he said in New Hampshire, don't wait for orders from headquarters. Mount up, everybody, and ride to the sound of the guns. And finally, it's interrupted by William Wallace of Braveheart, Mel Gibson, with the greatest short freedom speech in the history of movies. So if you can play the God Bless America, then we'll be back for the next hour and 10 minutes. And we have two calls on the line here. We'll take one. Okay, go ahead. We're back here with, everybody, we're back here with Jim Condit Jr., myself, and Jim Trafficant, former congressman, sitting next to me here. And we've covered a bunch of stuff we got till midnight, so we're going to take a call here real quick. Now, on the calls, I got to say this. You got to be interesting and get to your question pretty quick because we only got another hour. And then, and if not, I'm going to have to move on to the next caller. But let's see. We got Jeff calling here from Florida. Jeff, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm involved with a group, Guardians for Liberty, and of course we're taking a stand trying to teach people the principles we need in order to win our country back. And Jim, Congressman, I wanted to mention to you that my father in Cleveland, Ohio, has been a huge fan of yours, and right up until his last days about a year ago, and he made sure our entire family knew who you were and what you stood for. So I thank you for your service. He was a Seabee in World War II and served in Guam. That said, my question is, we've got a real problem with computer voting. Since computers can basically tabulate the vote any way it's programmed, had you had any thoughts or suggestions how we can turn the tide on that and get rid of these voting machines and get back to some sort of a hand-counted count in the open at the precincts all over the country?
Well, let me say this, Jeff. Number one, glad to hear your father was a supporter, and thank you for the kind comments. And your dad was certainly a patriot, has served his nation like that, and there's so many. And as Guardians for Liberty, I want you to take a look at Project Freedom USA. The state chairwoman down there is Nova Montgomery down around the Tampa area. We're having an event in early June, and I'd like to see you take a look at that and become involved and spread the word. And likewise, we could do the same with your group. As far as this whole situation on these fraudulent votes, I think it sounds archaic, but maybe it's time to get back to a paper ballot situation and start counting votes. But second of all, I think that there can be certain types of information released on the vendors of these things. I think that you've asked me these questions, and quite frankly, I think a real expert on this issue is sitting here right by me, and Jim Condit. He's taken the leadership. And I'd like for Jim to expound upon that for you, Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff, as you know, I'm a big supporter of Guardians for Liberty, and I've looked at both programs. Guardians for Liberty gives the mechanics of people how to get in and get the IRS abolished. So it's Guardians for Liberty, everybody, is at guardiansforliberty.com. 4 is spelled out, and soon you're going to have this ProjectFreedomUSA.org going up, and these two programs work hand in glove together, so thank you for that. People can go to votefraud.org, because I want to keep somewhat on the track we're on, I believe. They can go to votefraud.org, and that's linked at my main website, which is letfreedomring2014.com. That's letfreedomring2014.com. Project Freedom USA is also listed there, but it is a link. So you can learn how. We got to get back to paper ballots. 2 Supreme Court decisions have said it's illegal to have secretly counted elections. Nobody can see what's going on in a computer, not even the programmers during the election. Got to get back to hand-counted ballots at the precinct by the neighborhood citizens. Take about 12 per average precinct. It would cost us about $800 million a year to hand-count the ballots and pay everybody that does it $100 each, and that would be only what we spent in the first week, Jim Trafficant, that we were in Iraq. And who's elected makes all the decisions on foreign policy and local policy. So that's what we do on that, Jeff, and I know you're being with Guardians for Liberty, you're clued into that, and I really appreciate the call, okay?
Jeff, have me down there to speak about Project Freedom. Let me come down there and meet the people and talk to them.
Sure, it'd be great.
Okay, Jeff, thanks so much. Okay, so now we're going to go to James in Minnesota. James, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, Congressman, I'm going to throw out a real tough question to you. Pat Buchanan said that the Congress is Israeli-occupied territory. It appears to me and many Americans, more and more Americans, that Israel was behind 9/11. They were the maximum player. It wasn't some Muslims coming out of a cave in Afghanistan. And yet, after all of these years, there has been no congressman, including Ron Paul, that has stood up and said that on 9/11, America should have declared war on Israel. We have over 1 million innocent civilians that have died in these countries with these bogus wars of terrorism, and this was a major false flag by Israel in unison, the Mossad, with the CIA. I'd like to hear your comments on that, sir.
Well, number one, you're not going to have anybody in Congress going to touch it with a 10-foot pole because, first of all, if you get targeted by Israel and supporters of Israel in this country, you're going to have a rough time with the press. You're going to have a rough time raising money. You're going to have a rough time legally. I mean, it's just the bottom line. We've become invaded by a foreign power. That's why they say I'm an anti-Semite. I am not. I think Israel's going to hurt themselves. They're too overpowering. They control too much of this government, too much of our economic system. They control our media. It's gotten out of hand. And if you say something, you're basically blackballed. But let me say this. I have no specific knowledge of what happened in 9/11. But as a former sheriff, I always looked at one particular dynamic when I was involved with any type of an event like this. Who benefited? It put us into war in the Mideast. We whacked out Iraq. We've destabilized Iraq. And I do know this. The Israelis have had spies working the midnight oil in this country, trying to get us to attack Syria, trying to get us into attack Iran. Enough is enough now. I think it's time for Congress to say, look, Israel, you're our friend, but you're out of hand. You're out of line here now, and we've had enough. And I think that you bring a good point to the table, and I think an investigation should be ensued as to who really perpetrated the 9/11 situation, because I don't believe it myself.
Jim, we're about 30 seconds before the news, but let me say this. For what you just heard Jim Trafficant say in response to this caller, that, because he said AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, controls Congress, that's why he's banned since 2011 from ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox. He's banned 5 networks. So I want to say one other thing here, because we're about to go to the news. There's a new video up on YouTube by Barbara Honecker, who was in the Reagan administration, worked with Ronald Reagan every day, called Behind the Smoke Curtain. She goes into all the evidence that PNAC, the Project for the New American Century, and Many is in the Israeli lobby, not all, of course. Many of the Israeli advocates in our government, not all, of course, were neck deep in 9/11. The Muslims could not have made the NORAD stand down, for instance, for 2 hours while those attacks playing. But that's a video you should watch. She really does a good job. James, thanks for your call.
Well, I appreciate the question. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, and I'd just like to mention...
Wait, James, it's news time. Hold on, and we got another call.
Stay on the line.
Hold on. Are we, Mr. Producer, are we at news time here? Okay, we're about to go to news. So again, Jim Condit Jr. pulled the Constitution ballot for Congress in Butler County and John Boehner's district. Vote for me. Send Congress a message that we need congressmen that have the backbone like former Congressman Jim Trafficant. That's okay, thank you. Are we ready to go?
And now, let FreedomRing2014.com, the radio show.
Okay, we're back with Jim Condit Jr. and Jim Trafficant here. James of Minnesota was going to make one other quick comment, and then we're going to have to run along. But let's see, James, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yeah, thanks a lot. I just want to mention Christopher Bolin is at the top of his league in terms of reporting on 9/11. He's just a top-notch investigator.
Yeah.
He suffered very serious consequences.
Right.
And his website, where you can learn about 9/11 and who really did it, is Bolin.com. That's BOLLYN.com.
Yeah,
Bolin.com.
Yeah, and I know Christopher Bolin, and he is absolutely top-notch, and I agree with you. Okay, James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Okay, now, Jim, let's see. Let's go for a minute. I was watching on 2002, maybe, when they expelled you from Congress unjustly, and I didn't know you then. I had followed you, and I liked a lot of the stuff you were doing that I knew about. But I was watching for 2 hours on C-SPAN when you were talking, and I was saying to myself, what did he do? Somebody tell they never said what they did. You were telling me off air, they had, how many, tell them about the investigation they did, and they taped you for years, and they didn't,
Well,
go ahead.
The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily
Okay, go ahead. That's right, no problem. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
The views expressed in this program do not necessarily, I'm sure they don't. But let me tell you something. Anything that I have said reflects 100% what I feel and believe. But having said that, I was convicted in 2002 and sent to prison. I could have been out in 6 months. All I had to do was sign a form, say I was guilty. And naturally, everybody in my family and everybody's saying, well, go ahead. Why are you going to spend all that time in jail? I didn't go to country club, folks. I did 8 hard years. I think the government wanted to see me dead, quite frankly. But I told them to shove their pardon up their assets sideways, because no way am I going to be convicted of something I didn't do and then to get out of prison and let them off the hook. But here's something that happened that nobody realizes. It came out at trial that the Traficant investigation was a 6-year investigation, involved over 250 federal agents alone, at a cost of $25 million to the taxpayers. Now, keep in mind, while they were following me around, the World Trade Center was destroyed and the Pentagon was bombed. But they were following me around. But when it come to trial, they had 7 people that said they bribed me. 7 people that all, it now come out, were all scheduled to go to prison for anywhere from 10 to 20 years, and all of them got out of prison completely scot-free by lying. 4 of the 7 already admitted they lied. Now, in addition to that, the government said at trial they made no audio or video tapes of me. And I've got them on the record of them admitting that they made no tapes of any kind. Now what's come forward is they not only had tapes, they had a video camera in my office that I found out, Jim. And they're trying to get around that. And the reason for that government saying they made no tapes, folks, is they probably had boxes of tapes. But there were no crimes. And Mike Robertson, a Secret Service agent for years, actually told the press, he said, we couldn't have got an indictment against Trafficant. They didn't have one fingerprint, not one piece of physical evidence. They had 7 people that come up there and got out of prison for their testimony. And he said when there's no physical evidence, the government requires some admission of guilt by the target on some form of tape. And he said when the government said they made no tapes of Jim Trafficant, he says that man was railroaded. Now here's where we are. All those people that hate me, everybody's calling me a crook. Here's where we are. I'm going to try and put these bastards in prison. They've messed around with an innocent guy. Now, I'm not, any Pied Piper, and I'm not necessarily a Bible preacher, but I did not do the things they said I did, and they've destroyed me. But I did all 8 years, and I did very rough time, but now it's time they're going to have to face it. And I hope I can get some justice in some courtroom, because they have withheld exculpatory evidence that I could have used in my defense, and that is a federal crime. And I want these bastards to pay. That's it. Excuse my mouth, but that's the way it is.
In other words, you could use the tapes that didn't have any evidence against you against them for convicting you falsely.
The only reason the government said, 6-year investigation, they made no tapes, Jim. The only reason they said that is there was no crime on any of those tapes. Yeah. So I could have said, look, you have no physical evidence against me. You have these boxes of tapes. When did I talk to these people?
Yeah.
What did I do?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me.
Yeah.
See, they couldn't afford that. Who knows what's on those tapes? Probably what's on those tapes is all kind of exculpatory evidence on my behalf. They couldn't allow any tapes in the courtroom.
Now, didn't you go up against the Justice Department in 1984 pro se?
Yes, I did.
Tell them about that.
As a sheriff. I was tried as a sheriff back there when I cracked down on organized crime, and I was going to bust up organized crime. I got indicted for being involved with organized crime. I represented myself, Jim. I'm not an attorney. Mm-hmm. And I'm the only American in the history of the United States to ever defeat the United States Justice Department in a RICO trial, pro se, without being an attorney, full jury verdict. And they couldn't live with that. But the bottom line was I had to bring out at that trial the evidence that I had that the FBI in northeastern Ohio and in western Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, was on the payroll and was aligned with the mobsters. In fact, some of those judges knew people underground in the underworld that helped get them to make them judges. They can kid anybody else, and I've never said this, but I had that information too.
Yeah.
Listen, it was like an octopus that reached out there, and I completely destroyed that. They've tarnished my name, they destroyed me, and they've continued to denigrate any part of my character. But look, I've had it now. Here's an American that said, look, enough. Enough of this big government coming at us. This is our country. We've got to take it back now.
And there's, you may not believe this, I know there's several million people who know that you were not guilty, and that's why I say your fight is the fight for America. Now, this is Jim Condit Jr. interviewing Jim Trafficant, former congressman, former sheriff, former quarterback, which we'll mention briefly. And I'm running against John Boehner, and that's the reason this show's on is if you're a congressional candidate or a federal candidate, you get equal access with businesses. So I paid for the show. That's how we're on here tonight. And I'm running against John Boehner in the 8th District of Ohio. So if you live in Butler County or John Boehner's district, pull the Constitution ballot on Tuesday, May 6th. Vote for me. And that more people that pull the Constitution ballot, primary ballot, the more of a message will be sent to John Boehner in Congress. We want some backbone among the congressmen up there like we have here in Jim Trafficant. If you want to call in, the phone number is 513-749-5500. That's 513-749-5100. 513-749-5500. And the reason we're getting calls from Minnesota and Florida is because this went out on the internet that they could listen in at 55krc.com. So we got people from all over the country who are listening as well. So, Jim, if that goes to court someday, we may bring some of those people to justice who framed you, basically, to be put in jail.
Well, if I can ever get it there now, there's one very powerful person up around Cleveland that made a statement off the cuff to a friend of mine, not knowing that person was a friend of mine, and said if Trafficant can get this and bring this forward, he not only might have a case, he might be able to sue the government.
Mm-hmm.
See, here's what's happening, Jim. Not even a fingerprint. But the newspaper, before I went to trials, all the newspapers, they said they had boxes of tapes and thousands of fingerprints. You come out of trial, there wasn't one fingerprint, okay? And they said they made no tapes. The young FBI agent they put on a stand, I said, who told you they said they made no tapes? And he was so inexperienced, that's why they put him on, so he knew nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But his inexperience now has hurt them. He said, the assistant prosecutor. I said, is he here in the room? He said, yes. I said, point to him and describe what he's wearing. Mm-hmm. And let the record reflect he made a positive identification on the assistant U.S. attorney. The bottom line is, Jim, they probably had tapes on me since 1984. Now we find out from whistleblower they had video cameras in my offices. All of that should have been made available to Jim Trafficant on discovery.
Necessary.
That's a crime. That's a criminal offense to withhold the potential evidence that could be exculpatory on behalf of a defendant being charged by our powerful government, a reckless, powerful government.
They have to make it available to the other side. Right. That's part of the rules of the court.
The reason why they didn't was if they couldn't use them, what does that tell you? If they couldn't use them,
you could have used them.
That means I could have used them.
To exculpate.
And now you have a situation. Now, that jury was already set.
Yeah.
That jury was set up. Jesus Christ couldn't have won that trial.
And didn't the judge prevent you from entering your evidence?
She didn't even let some of my witnesses testify to the jury. She made them testify to her with the jury excused, and then did not allow their testimony to go to the jury under hearsay.
Yeah.
The one case, Jim, where she had to allow the testimony to go to the jury, she couldn't use a hearsay exception. You know what she did?
What?
She threw out the charge. So that witness who said his brother-in-law confided in him that he lied to avoid going to jail.
Lied about you to avoid going to jail. Yes.
And he said that in open court without the jury being present. And she threw that charge out because she couldn't legally keep his testimony from going to the jury because he did not qualify for a hearsay exception.
Now, there's a song. I want to just say something here that's a little off point, but really on point. There's a song by Toby Keith called American Soldier, and in the end of that song it says, "We're out here on the front lines, sleep in peace tonight." Well, Jim Trafficant and I aren't going to tell you to sleep in peace tonight, but we are trying to be out here on the front lines for everybody. So, Jim, I want you to tell a story now. I've heard a few of your speeches over the last few years, and this is an interesting story to everybody. I hope you don't mind telling it. In one of the prisons you were in, and these were maximum security in some cases, very rough. This was not country club.
It wasn't maximum security, but they were dangerous.
Dangerous prisons. Yes. They were real prisons.
They weren't country clubs.
Not country club where some of these
federal prisons.
Some of these coddled establishment figures go and they play golf and read books and eat gourmet food. This is a real prison. One of the prisons, one day, you got a call, word got passed to you that John Gotti's son wanted to see you. Tell that story. Everybody finds that story interesting.
I was up at Raybrook, and they call that Gladiator School up in upstate New York, and that's how dangerous it was. Guys are getting cut there and beat up there, and it was a dangerous place.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of guys in the unit where I was in said John Gotti, who was in another unit, said he'd like to meet me.
Yeah.
And he had something he had to say to me. It was important. Now, John Gotti's the son of the famous, the infamous, John
Gotti Sr., the Don organized crime guy,
So I went, and he ate earlier than me, and he stayed a little bit late, and I come a little bit early. And I sat down with him. He just says, I wanted to meet you, and I wanted to give you a little advice. I said, well, go ahead. He said, don't take any medication, Jim. He said, my dad come into prison, Dapper Dan. And 23 months later, he died. and his jaw literally rotted off his face. He said, don't take medication. He said, I can't prove it, but I guarantee you our government accelerated my dad's death in prison. Well, as strange as it works out, about 2 weeks later, I get a call that I'm to go to the medical staff, and I go to the medical staff, and they said I had a quote-unquote, Jim, corkscrew aorta. Not a tortuous, not a twisted. I want you to imagine the wording now. Corkscrew aorta, that I could die any second. And I said to him, I said, when did you discover that? And they said, well, when you came in, you took an x-ray. I said, that's 6 months ago, and you're telling me I'm going to die tomorrow? I says, listen, buddy, you're not giving me a damn aspirin. You understand? Well, anyway, I must have got so loud. They had the warden in there. They had psychiatrists in there. That morning, following morning at 3 a.m, I got tapped on the shoulder in his sleep, locked down with 6 other guys in a locked-down cell. I just came from a 12-room cell with 1 commode to now a 6-room cell. And they sent me to Rochester, Minnesota. And then when I got there, they said, well, it wasn't quite that bad.
So in other words, you were moved because I guess you maybe talked so loud about them trying to give you some medicine and this phony diagnosis that they wanted you out of that prison.
Yeah, they got me out of there real fast. They sent me to Rochester. And at Rochester, you know, it was a hospital type of facility, but you had those bombers in there. You had some of those wackos that blew up places and sent anthrax out, you know, and you had nuts and schizophrenics all over the damn place. And I think also they want to put on my record, make me look a little suspect, but I understand what they're doing. Let me tell you something. There was a statement made once by Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela made a statement that was true, very true. He says, you'll never know the true nature of a nation until you go through their prisons. I hope nobody has to go through a prison in the United States of America. I did. I've seen the other side of this one-eyed Jack. I've seen the bitterness of it. I had a guy in my first prison I went to, Ellenwood, they said it was low security. Jim, he pulled me aside and said, listen, I'll lose my job if they knew I told you this. But the reason you were sent here is 60% of these inmates are illegal immigrants. And they know that you come in here and you were the congressman that passed a bill to put troops from overseas on our border to keep them out. And they said, watch you don't get a knife in the back. Listen, I perpetrated an event that forced them to put me in maximum security lockdown for months. For months. All by myself with one other guy. Only one guy had a watch, not 1,000. But that's the way it was. And I think, you know, if I'd have got a knife in the liver or kidney, you know, you think anybody's going to say who did it?
Right.
You think the government's going to care? You know, I was put there to be hurt. There's no question.
Right.
He told me that. He said my mother was your biggest fan.
Wow. Okay, we got Judy is calling from Colorado. Judy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Jim. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Fine. In fact, is this Judy Spady of Colorado?
Yes.
Okay, everybody, this is one of the most dynamic people in the country. I don't know how she does it. She homeschools. She does this. She does that. Judy, what's going on? And Congressman Trafficant is sitting here.
Yeah. Hi, Congressman Trafficant.
How are you?
Glad to hear you guys speaking. Hey, I just wanted to talk with you guys and ask your opinion. I've launched a new project from the Liberty Movement that's called Defend, Not Amend, and it's all about trying to educate people on why this recent push to amend our Constitution from what they're calling the Convention of States, why I believe it's very dangerous. So I would like to get your guys, both of your weigh-in on what you think about this recent push to amend our Constitution.
Well, Judy, if it was you, me, Congressman Trafficant, Ron Paul, and a bunch of NRA people and Tea Party people, I'd say let's do it right now and strengthen things, but would get the same old John Boehners and Mitch McConnells and Chuck Schumers at this thing, so I'm against it. How do you feel, Congressman?
I agree 100%, Judy. Let me just say this. We don't really want to move towards a constitutional amendment to repeal the 16th Amendment, but we feel it's important. And what we advocate for Project Freedom is a single-purpose amendment, strictly convention for that one purpose. And if that can't be done, then we don't want anything. We don't really need to repeal the 16th Amendment to kill the income tax. But the problem is, if you don't repeal the 16th Amendment, you might get some Congress that might eventually put back on an income tax. They've got to go. It's a progressive communist program. So I'm with you. Defend, not amend. And I would say oppose any constitutional amendment. Period. Now, as far as
convention.
As far as Project Freedom is concerned, your name has come up even before this show. You have a real admirer here and supporter in Jim Condit, and he said, you know, there's a lady out there in Colorado that should be involved with Project Freedom. And,
I'm trying to give you more jobs, Judy.
I'm telling you, we would love to have you, and we'd be even incorporate your whole philosophy. We don't need to have that amendment, that convention, but we advocate a singular purpose convention, because we don't want to put it open to question either, where you get some of these people that are going to maybe bring a gun issue up or something else up. That can't be done. I think that we could weaken our Constitution even further than we have to this point. I think we've got to strengthen it. We've got to empower the citizen and reduce the power of the federal government. And that's what Project Freedom USA is all about. So I know that we're compatible there. I'd like to see you become involved, and anybody else who's listening, become involved with Project Freedom.
Judy, listen, I really appreciate you calling in, and hopefully we'll talk soon, okay?
Yeah, can I just say one quick thing? The only problem, and I agree with Jim. A lot of people are wishing we could repeal the 17th Amendment as well.
Yes.
Which I'm all for the repealing of the 16th or the 17th Amendments. The problem with a single issue convention that we've ran into, because there are some people that are advocating for a single amendment convention, but the problem is then what they have to do is they have to limit things so much. They have to tell the delegates at a convention, okay, you can only do this, and this, and you can't do any more. Well, the purpose of a convention is to deliberate and to, bring ideas forward. So it's difficult, because if you're doing a single issue convention, then there's one guy in Indiana who literally on this Convention of States thing says that he's going to control things so much that he proposes that the delegates to the convention have to listen to everything they say, and if they don't, and if they step out of line at all, then they should be charged with a federal crime. I mean, it's insanity. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds like the IRS,
with that.
Okay,
maybe he could end up like Jim Trafficant then in jail if you're a delegate that steps out of line.
In jail for
that's
nothing.
That's not a convention. That's a dictator.
Yeah. Okay, Judy. Well, thanks a lot, and we'll get it more educate.
I want you involved with Project Freedom, Judy.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
All right.
We'll talk soon, guys. Take
okay,
care.
Bye. Number again is 513-749-5500, and Judy is on my list, and of course all across the country we sent out, and others forwarded on that people could listen at 55krc.com tonight, and we've now had a call from, I guess, 4 states altogether. Jim, just on your personal background, you just didn't drop out of the sky and go into Congress. You were, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the quarterback for the University of Pittsburgh around 1960?
Early 60s.
And do I remember that you made the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they then got hurt in the trials?
No, I was drafted by the Steelers.
Okay.
I had very serious injuries coming out of college.
Okay.
But I was drafted by the Steelers, but I didn't play.
Okay.
I was with the Oakland Raiders and would have been out there on a taxi squad.
Okay.
But back then they hardly paid any money.
Okay.
And I was basically done with the injuries. But I was quarterback at the University of Pittsburgh. My sophomore year, Mike Ditka, who's on ESPN, was my end and receiver, and Mike and I are friends, and those were good days. And that's that background out of high school in Youngstown, Ohio, Cardinal Mooney High School. Then I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I was all set to go to Notre Dame, Jim. And on Christmas Eve, they fired the head coach.
Oh.
Unheard of. Terry Brennan was fired Christmas Eve. They got in an argument with the president of the university, and none of the kids that were recruited by Terry Brennan were kept on schedule, or I'd have been at Notre Dame.
Okay. And then you became a sheriff in Youngstown.
Yeah, I was sheriff for 4 years.
Okay.
And then I was elected to Congress. I was the only Democrat to defeat a seated Republican incumbent in Ronald Reagan's landslide victory in 1984. I was the only one. to defeat a Republican incumbent.
Okay, and you, I saw some footage when you were sheriff, when they were covered something on the media a few years ago, 60 Minutes. But when you came and you saw the bank had not tried to negotiate with the family to help the family save their home, you would often walk away and say, "I'll come back," right? When you two negotiate.
No, what happened is, Youngstown lost 55,000 steelworker jobs, union jobs. One weekend was devastated. And at some particular point when I was sheriff, I was getting a lot of foreclosure documents to sign, transfer deeds. And the state law says the sheriff shall sign the transfer deed. And when it says shall, I mean, you don't question why. You're mandated by law. You got to sign them.
Yeah.
Well, I looked at it, and this one woman come to me, and she missed one payment.
Yeah.
She had a 30-year mortgage, paid for over 22 years. Her husband died, missed one payment, and they started foreclosure proceedings on her. Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't sign. I looked at that, and I saw too much of that. That's when the interest rates were up to 14%.
Yeah.
And these people had 4 or 5% mortgages, and they were trying to get out from under them. So I said, I'm just not going to sign these transfer deeds. Well, what they did is they brought me into court, Jim, and they put me in jail for not signing them. Mm-hmm. But it raised such a furor that the banks and everybody got so embarrassed when it came out what was happening there that they worked out a deal, and those people were able to keep their homes. Now, when I got to Congress, I passed legislation, Jim, to protect the house and the family. Yeah. I made it a 1-800 number that had to be given when you're 45-day delinquent, a 45-day delinquent notice, and the creation of these housing counseling groups that mitigated between the bank and the property owner to save their homes. Mm-hmm. And even the newspapers, which hated my guts, even said it was a good program.
Yeah, great. Mr. Producer, I think it's time for the bottom of the hour identification. So we'll be back in a second.
You're listening to LetFreedomRing2014.com, the radio show, paid for by Jim Condit Jr. for Congress 2014.
Okay, we're back. This is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress, paying for the show. Our guest is the Honorable Jim Trafficant, former quarterback at University of Pittsburgh, former sheriff, and former congressman. And if you want to call in, the number is 513-749-5500. That's 513-749-5500. Jim,
I'm a lot of formers, I just hope you don't say the former Jim Trafficant here. No. I got to walk out of here. You're killing me, Condit.
Okay.
You bring me all the way down here. You put me on the stand here. You grill me. You take advantage of me. And I've had it with you, Jim.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
We got to get through this next half hour now.
Go ahead.
Now, when I've heard you speak, you would do a section on how wrong it is that the IRS has so many Americans in fear. And you gave an example of, I guess it was a fictionalized example of a couple's running a business, they get a bill for $20,000 from the IRS out of the blue, and the wife is so afraid that, did you remember that?
Yeah, I think I dramatized it once at an event up in, what was that, New Jersey or Delaware?
Philadelphia, the Freedom Palooza.
Yeah, Freedom Palooza, Paul Tepetti's group. Well, I more or less make the point. Maybe the American people, I don't think they understand this. But I want them to listen to this very, very carefully. An IRS executive testified before Congress and made the following statements. I want to quote now. Without fear, we cannot collect taxes in America. Listen to the words, without fear. So that means that the IRS employs tactics of fear and intimidation. Well, I dramatize the situation to more or less make the point, especially with the burden of proof, how the taxpayer was really behind the 8 ball. So I want you to imagine now that it's the old law when you go to civil tax court, the taxpayer had to prove they're innocent. Here's the way it worked. The family gets a notice through the mail. You owe $56,000, and you are to pay this $56,000 by such and such, or there shall be penalties attached, blah, blah, blah. So evidently the husband and wife have been talking about it, and she's worried to death, and the husband's saying, we don't own this. And now they're at dinner with their 3 children, and out of the blue, the wife finally, through frustration, says, John, let's settle this thing. I'm scared, John. I'm scared to death, John. I called our accountant. He said he could work this out, John. Let's call him. Let's talk to him, John. I'm afraid, John. And the husband says, Martha, please, we don't owe that money. I've had it. Enough is enough. John, you don't understand. Martha, not in front of the kids. Well, then when, John? I'm afraid, John. I'm afraid, John. And folks, they would call the accountant. The accountant would go down, and they'd settle it for $30,000. And the guy probably didn't owe a damn dime. And that's basically the plight of American families. What do we need this for? What the hell is wrong with us? What are we afraid of? You know, is it our country, Jim?
I think
it's our country.
It's our country.
These people work for us.
Yeah.
Man, we need an attitude adjustment in this country. An attitude adjustment. And the American people got to take their government back. It's too damn big. It's too fat. They're throwing money everywhere to get reelected. All these people are doing is getting reelected. They've created a welfare state. Half of the nation is dependent. You have 50 million people on food stamps. What the hell is next? You're now getting to a point where it might be impossible under a free republic to have enough votes to right this ship. It's critical time now, Jim.
Yep. And that's why we need the grassroots movement. I don't care what movement you're in. You want to join together with Jim Trafficant here in Project Freedom USA, because here we have a leader. And in the Guardians for Liberty site, it tells us how we can take back the parties, both Democrat and Republican, because they run every county. See,
they could all be incorporated. We could all get together.
That's right.
Just like all the independents in this country should. Everybody's pulling in opposite directions. Everybody got to come together.
Yeah, the Democrats and Republicans run every county, so you replace their party leaders, which we tell you how to do it at guardiansforliberty.com, and you then put good congressmen up there, and you can change all the bad laws and go to all the constitutional laws within 6 months to a year. I want to say a little blurb again here that I'm Jim Condit Jr. running for Congress against John Boehner. So if you like what you're hearing here tonight from Jim Trafficant and myself, you can send Boehner and Congress a message by picking the Constitution Party ballot in Butler County and in the rest of District 8. Constitution Party primary ballot, vote for me. Everybody that does that, it'll send a message to John Boehner and Washington that we want leaders of backbone like we have here in former Congressman Jim Trafficant. Now, Jim, you said something earlier that I think probably flew past everybody unless they've heard it before. You said if there was a surplus, once your program this program was implemented, if there was a surplus, that a dividend or a payment would be sent to every family rather than go to the bankers or something. That is very possible, ladies and gentlemen. With all the technology, all the machines, we have an embarrassment for riches. If the Goldman Sachs and the Fed and IMF weren't skimming everything off the top, we would have a regular surplus in this country, and a dividend or a payment dividing up that surplus could go to every family once we got the IRS and the Fed under control.
For every household. That's exactly right. Look, it's the people's money.
Yeah.
You know, it's the people's money, and it should be returned to the people, any surplus. Well, they say, Jim, what about if we're deficit spending? Well, listen, these turkeys have been deficit spending now for 40 years.
Yeah, and beyond.
And we may have to, hear me, I want to make this point. If, in fact, the Project Freedom program were to be implemented, there'd be a lot of machinations involved, a lot of technical work down in Washington to make it happen. But the basic construct is played out there for people. But it's going to take a transition time. there would probably be a 3 to 5 year period where in adjusting from earned income to consumption tax, there would be a change. Now, 45 states already collect the sales tax, and they'd get a small stipend for collecting the tax for our federal government. We'd have to put an operation together in the other 5 states. But the bottom line is they'd get the money instantaneously. Now, I wanted to explain this one case. I had a woman that questioned me, and she said, look, I'm an executive. She says, and I'm going to give you my information, and I'll keep this party name private.
Right.
But she says, tell me how your tax would work. And Jim, I looked at her form, her tax 10W. She made $121,000. This is a sharp woman, very intelligent, good wage earner.
Yeah.
Of that $121,000, she invested $23,000 in a 401k plan.
Okay.
Retirement. $25,200 was withheld from her pay in the form of withholding and payroll tax withholding. At the end of the year, she got back a refund of $200. Her gross wage was $121,000, but her adjusted gross pay was $94,000. She paid $25,000 in taxes, and it was all withheld from her. Under the fair tax, Project Freedom USA, she'd have got the full $25,000. Rather than the government deciding what to do, she'd have got it.
Right.
Second of all, she'd have paid 19% on anything she expended. She couldn't spend more than $94,000. I asked her, how much average money do you spend a month? She said at the most $5,000. So let's say she spent $60,000. Her tax
from the sales tax,
yes,
would be $9,000.
About it.
So this is going to save people money, and I know.
Well, it would have been more than that.
Yeah, because right,
a little more than that.
So you don't believe this. Check it out for yourself.
But the point is that everybody is paying, though, Jim.
Exactly.
And they're saying, well, what about the people on the bottom end of the ladder, Trafficant? They're buying now, aren't they? They're buying products. They're buying food. They would get a rebate for basic necessities to help them, but it's a floor, not a giveaway.
Right.
But their welfare, as we know it, would be eliminated. They would get a check to go to work unless they're disabled.
Right.
But keep in mind, they're averaging $60,000 a year, many of these dependents.
Right. Okay, Jim, we got 2 calls. One call here is from California, and then the other gentleman will hold on. We'll get to him next. This is it says it's on the Federal Reserve, Project Freedom. Okay, hello. Who is there?
Hello, this is Chris.
Chris, thanks for calling. Chris is calling from California. What's going on, Chris?
Not too much, Jim. I'm having a great time listening to this radio show you got going. This is some of the best radio I have heard in a long time.
I agree, and it's because of the congressman. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, it's very much because of the congressman as well as you, Jim. I do have a couple questions for you, Congressman Trafficant. I'd like to hear a little bit more about Project Freedom and where we can go online to learn more about it.
Okay.
And I'd also like to hear you speak a little more about divorcing the Fed. What does that really mean?
Jim, let me say this before you do. Right now, there's no Project Freedom USA website up. It'll be soon. So go to my congressional website, Let Freedom Ring. 2014.com. It kind of rhymes. Let Freedom Ring 2014.com. Send me an email or hit the link there, and we'll tell you how to get in contact with Congressman Trafficant. Go ahead, Congressman Trafficant.
Yeah, but we have reserved, and it's just starting. I made a speech in Orlando, Florida, and what developed from it is a national program. People said, look, we meet all the time. We talk about problems. But we don't do anything. We don't follow through. And we think that this is what we need to do. This deals with our finances. This deals with our freedom, et cetera, et cetera. So the website that's been reserved is projectfreedomusa.org. projectfreedomusa.org, and we're in the process of trying to get that up and running. Now, as far as the word divorce, it's very interesting that you picked up on that because it's a psychological hit, no question. Everybody's saying, kill the Fed, audit the Fed. Let me tell you something, Chris. When they audit the Fed, it's going to come back and say it's the best thing since sliced bread. You know, this is ridiculous. What we're saying is, look, you have the right to exist. We don't advocate your total demise. We don't want to audit you. We want a divorce. 100 years didn't work. It's over. You go along your way. And perhaps maybe you could bid on activities in this country. There's still going to be a private banking apparatus. But the money supply and the monetary policy is removed after this divorce from the Federal Reserve back to the Congress of the United States, which shall issue the money, and it shall be debt-free money. Now, we honor anyone who bought a bond or anybody who's purchased our T-bills. But the interest payments that have accrued over the years in the trillions to these international bankers would be repudiated, and we'll see you in court for this divorce, for this adultery. That's it. It's really a play on words, but we're not advocating killing them. We're not advocating auditing them. Do your own thing, but no more with us. We're done.
And, you know, there's a provision in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that we can get out of it really easy. There's a provision in there that a banker from Georgia named Charles Collins made popular. Listen, Chris, I really thank you for calling, okay?
One other thing, Jim, before he leaves.
Go ahead.
1913 wasn't only the creation of the Fed. We also had the creation of the Internal Revenue Service, which, in my opinion, is the collection agency for the damn Fed. Let's get them the hell out of here.
There you go. Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chris.
Lori,
help us out. Help us, Chris.
Yeah, right. Lori from South Dakota is calling. How you doing, Lori?
Hey, Jim. How are you?
Fine,
Good.
thank you.
How are you?
Good. It sounds pleasure being on the line with two true patriots. That's obvious, and I hope it is to everybody listening.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Traficant, I'm sure that we probably agree on probably 90% of the issues. I just wanted to bring up some points where I disagree with you for a purpose of having a good debate. On the tax issue, as a constitutionalist, we know that, and actually the Blue Ribbon Commission, the Grace Commission under Ronald Reagan, did a study on where the federal income tax dollars actually goes. And if you want to visualize a huge tractor trailer full of cash going from the IRS directly to the Federal Reserve Bank, that's where every penny, and was proved by that commission, is where the tax dollars go.
J. Peter Grace led that commission, the big
Absolutely.
businessman. Yeah, right.
And so so we know that that's why we have 100 other taxes to disguise the fact of where our federal income dollars are really going. They're not going for any of these services that people think. We have all these additional taxes that are actually fulfilling and paying these other bills. So instead of, I would ask you to reconsider your position on changing to yet another slave-driven progressive tax like the fair tax, and instead get rid of the Federal Reserve. Then all that money that, is not needed to be replaced by a national sales tax, and any additional monies that we need that aren't covered under those other taxes can surely be done constitutionally by reinstating across the board 10% tax on all foreign imports instead of a national sales tax, which I believe would be just as regressive on the American people as what we have now.
Okay.
Right.
So I would just ask you to reconsider.
Let me respond, Lori, because it's a very good point you're bringing. And I've heard this, and I don't think there's anybody more in America that would like to throw everything out but me. I want to throw it all out, too. We have a great nation. We have a tremendous nation. It costs money to operate our nation. And quite frankly, there would not be enough there without a foundation tax, number one. Number two, a 10% tax on tariffs would cause a trade war that would probably bankrupt America totally. Keep in mind that border-adjusted fair tax is the first non-protectionist tariff, if you will, in the history of this country. Keep this in mind with the Harvard study. Here's an American car. Say it's a $20,000 car. It costs General Motors $20,000 to make this car. They then ship it overseas. It's not selling overseas. Now with the fair tax, a $5,000 load is lifted off that. It's now a $15,000 car. It's not sold in America. It's sold overseas. Now it's much more competitive overseas. But in addition, those cars coming from overseas, coming in here scot-free, no longer, they're subject to the same tax as ours.
Right.
I would like to say no taxes, but here's what I want to caution you on. And everybody that gets involved like this, there's not going to be anything done, and there will continue to be a communist income tax unless everybody gets together on a rudimentary foundation tax program that's fair to everybody, that gives a rebate on the bottom and can keep the prices down. Let me tell you something. If anything, I'm almost to the point of saying reduce our government by 30% and break that tax down to even 15% where we won't even notice it. We won't even notice it from the prices we have now. But I want to make sure that Social Security and Medicare is there for our seniors and for our future seniors and their kids.
Right. But that goes to my point, though. Social Security and Medicare is a different tax that we pay out of our wages. So,
yes, income.
So what I'm saying is the dollars, if you agree with me and the Grace Commission that every dollar of federal income tax was going nothing but to pay the interest on our debt, if we got rid of the Federal Reserve and the IRS, there is no reason we have to replace that with anything.
There still wouldn't be enough money there. And one thing the Grace Commission did not do, it did not say get rid of the IRS nor income taxes. And there's a lot of studies that we've had, and everybody has all of these ideas, but listen to this. For 100 years, we have a communist income tax coming at us, and we have a group of international bankers running us, and we'll have them for another 100 years if we don't put a stop to it. And you're not going to have enough money to run this country if you eliminate the foundation tax.
Lori,
that's got to be replaced.
Lori, I'm I'm up against the clock, and you've
okay.
But listen, you have brought up
good points
for people to think about. It's not these things have to be thought about, and I got to get a few other things in here before the show ends.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for calling,
Thank
Lori.
you, Lori. But look, it's going to take money to finance our great government. But Project Freedom, it advocates a reduction of 25% in the size of our government immediately. It abolishes the Federal Reserve. It divorces the Fed. Go your own way. It puts the money supply back under Congress. That tax that you're talking about is the first non-protectionist border-adjusted tax in our history. It's needed to solve our trade deficits. And it raises enough revenue to totally fund Social Security, Medicare, and our general fund.
Lori, thanks. We'll pick this up again, hopefully.
Right,
thanks. Bye-bye.
you.
Okay, before we end, Congressman, this is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress. Pick the Constitution Party ballot on May 6th if you live in John Boehner's district, and send him a message. Want to cover one other thing here real quick. We're getting down to be out of time. There's going to be music starting in a few minutes.
Good point she makes, though. Great woman. I wish we had her on our side.
Yeah, and we may. You had a chance to sign that you were guilty and get out of prison years and years early. And I'm telling people, think about this. If you were in Jim Trafficant's situation, you were innocent, and they said, we'll let you out 5 years early if you sign that you're guilty.
7 years early.
7 years early. I hope I would do what Jim Trafficant did, but I got a daughter getting married later this year. You have things going.
I missed my daughter's wedding.
Did you?
I missed the birth of her 3 children.
Wow.
But you know what? I wouldn't let them have the privilege of railroading me and then having me give away my freedom, This is our country.
Yeah,
we're the boss, Jim.
Yeah, and my point is, I hope I would do what Jim Trafficant did, but we know what he did. He stood up for principle and will not sign a false statement. We know what he did. So the next time you hear somebody say something bad about Jim Trafficant, he went to prison, whatever, he went to prison because he stood up for you and me. And the congressmen that are going along with Wall Street and Goldman Sachs, they are being made multi-millionaires. We got to have a complete change. We got to have a grassroots movement. For tonight, go to LetFreedomRing2014.com. It'll tell you how to get in touch with Jim Trafficant, and we're going to work with him because he's a national leader with the charisma to make this happen. Jim, make a closing statement. I think in about 1 minute, then you're going to start the music, Mr. Producer. Okay, so close up for 1 minute.
I have a minute.
You have a minute, and I'm going to make.
One of my famous 1 minute speeches was about Lorena Bobbitt, but I can't do that today.
I was going to say,
but next time I'm on, I want to say this. Let me say this.
Go ahead.
I came down here because of my respect for you,
and I appreciate it.
And I could see from the nature of your calls from all around the country that people know of you, Jim, and have a high regard for you. You don't have a lot of money. You don't have anybody big behind you.
No, except you.
A guy like me, and I've got more baggage than Amtrak. But I'll tell you something. I'm here because I love you. I think you're great. I want you to become involved with Project Freedom USA. I would hope to hell that you can go to Washington and represent people. It's going to be an uphill drive, and I told you that.
Yeah.
But I want you to keep fighting. And keep up the good work and Godspeed.
And I feelings mutual about you, and we're going to work together. And I really thank you for traveling down. It's an 8-hour round trip. It's a tremendous effort that the congressman made to be here. So let's see. We're going to have the music starting now. Okay. I just want to say a few more things. Again, this is Jim Condit Jr. for Congress, 2014. If you live in John Boehner's district in Butler County, then pick the Constitution ballot 2 days from now on May 6th. Vote for Jim Condit Jr. for Congress. I want to read a few quotes here as we're closing here. This is from Hilaire Belloc. Hilaire Belloc, who was a writer and a politician in Britain for a while in the 30s. He said, so long as he said, an ingrained habit of the defensive is a prime condition of defeat. In other words, if all you do is play defense, you're going to be defeated. That's why we got to get on the positive program of what Congressman Trafficant's been talking about here tonight. ProjectFreedomUSA.org and GuardiansForLiberty.com, the mechanics of how to do it. Another quote that I want to read here is from G.K. Chesterton. He said, the whole world is dividing itself into liberals and conservatives. The job of the liberals is to go on making mistakes. The job of the conservatives is to prevent those mistakes from being corrected. We're going to have a new third force that is going to be patriots that is going to correct them. Now, I'm Catholic, and I'm going to read two Pope quotes here. Pope Leo XIII said in 1884 or so, Christians are born for combat. Wherefore, the greater the vehemence, the more assuredly God aiding the triumph. Have confidence, I have overcome the world, St. John 16:13. Finally, Pope St. Pius X said in 1908 or so, all must remember that nobody has the right to remain indifferent when religion or the public welfare are in danger. Those who strive to destroy religion and civil society aim above all else at getting control as far as possible of the direction of public affairs and at having themselves chosen legislators. It is therefore necessary that everyone should strive with all their might to avert that danger. I want to thank Jim Trafficant again from traveling down here. This is a beginning, not an end, and I really thank all of you for listening and all of you around the country that called and locally that called. Thank you very much.